Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and today we have the amazing and talented Shelley Brown. Shelley, how are you?
I am great and so honored to be here, Andy. Thank you.
Oh, Shelley, I am just so excited to have you on, especially this week, because you've been doing some amazing things in your life, and I can't wait to get into that and share with the world all the stuff you have going on. So, folks, in a minute, I'm going to ask Shelley what her awkwardness is. But before that, Shelley, can you tell us something exciting you have going on, or let the world know a little bit about you so we can just get in love with you as much as I am? We want to get the listeners on board here.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you so much. Well, I have a lot going on, actually, and a lot of it has been this sort of pandemic pivot, which has helped me launch a greeting card line of my hand-cut collage. I've been doing a lot of cool art, but most importantly, I just recently did a big TEDx-style talk, and I have a big book release coming out on Mother's Day and a big pre-launch. I keep using the word big, and a pre-launch strategy, a big pre-launch strategy.
Right. Stay with the theme.
And I'm 5'1" and I'm like this big. But anyway, everything's big.
Right. You can have a big voice and be a big personality no matter what size you physically are, right?
That's right.
I love that. I love the word that you use, pandemic pivot. I feel like that's something we need to be hearing more, because that's something that it gives us the control, right? To say, well, there's this change or there's this thing we're dealing with, but this is what I'm doing and where I'm going. And listen to the things you have going on: a book, a greeting card line, this big talk, which I listened to, and you guys need to check that out as soon as the link's available. We'll have it in the description. But it was moving and touching and super inspiring. So you did a great job.
Thank you. Totally out of my comfort zone, because I'm usually in my bag of tricks are funny, fun, and more. And this was a pretty heavy topic, but
yeah, it's interesting when you step out of your brand a little bit, or even if you're in your brand, but you just kind of, approach the world in a different way. It's a great challenge, but it makes you kind of really sit there for a moment and think about what you're doing. Yeah. So, Shelley, the world wants to know, what's your awkward? What's that thing you've had to own to get to where you are today?
Well, thanks. My awkward is really knowing that we're all weird, different weirding, same dog, different paws, and that we're just this sort of collective humanness of weirding. We're all weird, just different weird. And it took me the majority of my life to be like, yeah, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, how early in your life did you feel like you were the weird girl?
Oh my gosh, it started pretty young. And I remember when I look back, my biggest weird sort of story came when I would take off Ken's leg to make sure that Barbie would still love him.
Oh,
of course he would, because even in, a mess, love still
right.
ends off.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So one of the most pivotal moments when I realized I was weird.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because you said that it took you your whole life to kind of get to a point to realize that that's just okay. Was there a pivotal moment that made you realize that it's okay to just be weird and that's who you are?
Honestly, I think I just got so darn tired of suffering, and I learned that the things that we think isolate us, the thoughts that we have, the feelings that we have that we think are so weird and so different are actually our biggest connection to humanity. There is not one thing or feeling that we thought or had that somebody else hasn't thought that same version. It's not the exact thought or the exact
Mm-hmm.
feeling, but it's some version of that. And when we know that, it really frees us from this feeling of isolation and that we don't belong and that we really are connected. And the biggest lesson for me too is you don't have to like it. You don't have to love it. You don't have to embrace it. It's just about allowing and just knowing that this is what it is without
Mm-hmm.
qualifying it. And that gave me a lot of freedom.
Wow. I love that idea of just not qualifying it, because I feel like a lot of times we're looking for permission to be the way we are. And we get that by, we give that to ourselves by qualifying and say, well, it's okay because X, Y, and Z. And being able to step out from that and just let it be what it is. How did that feel when you actually had that realization?
It felt very freeing. There's a prevailing message, especially right now, this whole thing about self-love and self-compassion. And you know what? All right. I love myself, but I also don't like myself so much. And my
Mhm.
next talk is going to be called, and this is in writing, so it's what it is. Self-love is a crock of should.
Oh,
That
I
is my
love that.
next talk. That doesn't mean that we don't love ourselves. It just means that when you come from a place that is so far away from self-love,
Hmm.
this notion of self-love is like put your cheesy poofs, down, get off the couch and go run an Ironman when you've never run 2 miles in your life.
Right. Well,
Or okay, a half a mile in your life.
yeah, and I love that that you call that out, because there is that notion that I think we get caught up in the idea of self-love and self-care, and we only then in that light are willing to love ourselves when we see ourselves in that light. And so we can say, well, I'm loving myself, so I'm working towards a marathon or even a 5K, or I love myself because I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And then when we have those moments where we don't like ourselves, we're like, yeah, that I don't like that guy. So that's, you're not going to have that self-love moment, but it's still part of life. It's the whole bundle.
I kind of discovered that there's this thing that many of us go through when we're looking for a way to self-identify. And I call it looking at the world as our identity clothing store.
Oh,
And so we base our identity based on what we're doing at that time, what that accomplishment is, what that accolade is, what that goal is, what our job is, how much money we have. We look at the world as our identity clothing store. And I have actually experienced a time in my life where everything I thought I was got taken in a bucket and dumped on the ground. And
mm,
a lot of this is not unique. Is it like the
sure.
majority of us go through that? Oh crap, my life bucket just got
Hmm.
dumped upside down. Who the you know what am I now? If I
Right.
don't have an anchor for my identity. And so who are you when the thing that you think you are is completely gone? You
Hmm.
figure it out. And we're just who we are.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely went through that when I got divorced and came out. My whole life had been identifying as a family man and father, and my career changed, and all the things that I tied my identity to, it's not that they went away, but they were flipped upside down for sure. And all of a sudden it's, well, so it was, for me, it came down to finding out what of the things when the bucket was flipped upside down were still there that I could kind of grab and put back in the bucket, and what are the things that didn't really matter anyway, and find out, I'm the heart and soul of a person isn't any one activity. I like to talk about the beach ball.
True.
Huh?
That's so true.
Yeah. I like to talk about this beach ball idea where if you hold up a beach ball, you can see 3 or 4 colors of stripes, and you might see red, blue, and green on this side. But on the other side are different colors that other people can see. And each of those stripes represents one piece of who we are. And we don't always show all those pieces to the world.
Right. I agree. I did have a complete sort of disintegration with who I am and the things that
Mm-hmm.
made me me. And I didn't really have anything salvageable that got dumped upside down that wasn't
Okay.
myself. And I know there's a lot of people like that that this happens to, that their identity is based on what's going on in the world. I kind of liken it like somebody who's transgender, and that struggle for being something that the world thinks that they're not, like being a
Mm-hmm.
different sex than they were born into. And a lot of us, because of our families and things like that, we get pushed into a trajectory that is so not aligned with who we really are, that we can get caught up in this sort of, I have no idea. So there's a lot of different
Yeah.
stores that you visit along the journey of realizing that it's not outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine while you're doing that, it's like you're trying to put those clothes on to live the image or live the person that you feel you're supposed to be. And then at some point you question, am I doing it to live the image, or am I doing it because it really is what's in me? And that's a lonely place. I feel when you don't know what your why is.
Yes, for sure. And I don't even know if you know at the time, like, is this really it? You just know you're so damn uncomfortable. It's like
Mm.
wearing 100% wool sweater when you have sensitive skin and you're like, "Ugh, nuts, you know? So then
Yeah.
you go and get something that's too hot. It's like wearing a winter sweater in the summer, and then you're sweating, but you still don't really get why, you know? It just,
Right.
it's this continuum. And then something happens. Maybe somebody says something, or, like I kind of had my 100th nervous breakdown to get me to mindfulness, where I was like, oh, it's just the crap going on in between my ears that is telling me all this stuff. It's just this judgment and this all this crap. And mindfulness really shifted everything for me.
Yeah. So how did you find out about mindfulness when you're sitting? I'm just picturing you on the floor with an upside down bucket and everything's everywhere, and you're like, where do I go? What do I do? What was that first step to even bringing it together to finding that mindfulness?
Well, besides the bucket, I couldn't really sit on the floor because I had been an endurance athlete and had a lump
Mm.
spinal fusion. So
Oh,
besides that, my love of my life turned into a crack addict, whatever,
right.
crazy story. So I can't get on the floor, but I'm on the floor. And
Hmm.
it was sort of a continuum of little breakdowns of trying to fit into a trajectory that wasn't working for me. And then ultimately I was at a job one day and something happened and I misinterpreted it. And in front of 20 people in a work environment, I ripped off my headphones, threw them on the floor, and I had an outer body experience. I'm like, I effing hate this place. I effing hate this job. I don't know what the F I'm doing here. I effing can't take it anymore. And and then I like kind of came to like, oh my God, what just happened? And the pot just literally blew open. And it was like it was literally like a nervous breakdown. Long story short, I had remembered that somebody told me about mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I went to a MBSR program, which I highly recommend because I consider us people who our sort of nervous system wires get crossed, and that MBSR program helped kind of reset those wires. And for the first time in my life, I sensed what I had always been looking for, which is a sense of peace and ease. So that was several years ago.
Wow. So when did you say it was MBSR, the mindfulness base? So that is something I'm not really familiar with. I mean, I've heard a little bit about it, but how did you actually get into doing that? Is it something that you read about, you attended classes on?
So I had experienced some significant insomnia for a while, and it was really my stress response after my injury. And I was going to a sleep specialist and thinking that something was wrong with me physiologically, that was preventing me from sleep. And he said, well, I really think that it is anxiety and stress. And
Mm.
so he recommended this mindfulness based stress reduction program, which has been around for 30 years. It's out of UMass, John Kabat-Zinn. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to sit on the floor like a yogi and drink tea
Hmm.
when I'm a coffee drinker. And I was like, ew. And I was really skeptical. But then after that nervous breakdown, I was desperate. And it's an 8-week program, and I would recommend it to everybody. And it was so transformative
Wow.
that I ended up working with a former monk to get certified to be a mindfulness educator.
Wow. Well, and I think that when we get to that place where the bucket's upside down and we need to get our life in order, that creates more open-mindedness, or we need to create open-mindedness if we're not already doing it, in order to think about things that, when someone says, oh, I'm going to go sit on the yogi mat, and I'm like, it's not me. But if what you're doing isn't working, you have to be open to other ideas and look at what it's done.
I think that you're right. I also think that we have a tendency to gravitate back to something that sort of kind of worked before.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think everybody has a readiness factor, and for a lot of people, that readiness factor comes with a tremendous amount of pain. And there's a lot of people with a low threshold for being in pain in life.
Mm.
So we try to retrofit something that had some semblance of, oh yeah, that was kind of okay back then.
Right.
But it didn't really either. So when we get done trying all the things that we thought used to be something that they weren't, then we become willing.
Yeah, I feel like, excuse me, I feel like we get to that place where there was some comfort in it, and that gives us just enough hope to feel like, well, maybe if I did it a little bit longer or did it a little bit better, then I'm going to get over that line. And yet it keeps us in that place of just never getting past that hurdle. And so you're right. It's easy to go back to that. When I talk to people about change, I saw this meme. I can't take credit for this, but I saw this meme about switching from one partner to another, significant other. And you look at your history and you went from Sprite to Sierra Mist to 7-Up, and you never really changed anything other than the label, but all the flavors are the same. It's all, lemon lime soda.
Yeah.
And I think we do that in so many ways in our lives where when you go to make a change, the problem isn't that you need to make more changes. It's that you didn't make a big enough or a drastic enough change, because you're just changing a few things, but staying in your comfort zone. And you really have to get in that space of not getting comfortable.
Absolutely. And that's so true, especially for entrepreneurs. I mean, I was in the corporate world, and the financial insecurity and scarcity fears prevent me, all my life, I'm an artist, I'm a creative, and, I love people. And yet I pigeonholed myself in this one trajectory as a corporate salesperson, that it really wasn't my truest nature to be that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, I got to look like a badass, so I'm going to keep on doing that. And then when it just kept on showing me that it wasn't a fit for me, and I finally had to take a leap of faith to do it. And my first iteration was to go back to corporate and do mindfulness training for corporate. And then it was great, but the pandemic kind of took that away. Then it was another, okay. But once you start iterating and it gets closer to you, each iteration seems to get closer, more closely aligned to the truth of what you really want and really want to share with the world. And that's when your why becomes your must.
I love that. And I think one myth that we tell ourselves is we have these pivotal moments or these aha moments. And then we think, okay, I've made that pivot. This was the day that I discovered that's where I needed to go. And we never expect to have another pivotal moment again. instead of it being, well, I had the pivotal moment to get out of corporate and go into mindfulness training, but now I need to have my pandemic pivot. And each one does what you just said. It gets you a little bit closer and refines what it is that you're doing and who you are. And we have to be open to still seeing those happen and being okay with, well, sure, I pivoted and I thought that 45 degrees was enough, but I guess I needed another 30 degrees and maybe another 10 degrees later, because it's a continual journey.
Totally.
Yeah. So how, I mean, you're doing so many amazing things. How, in an essence, do you sum up being that weird girl? How do you make that awkward just like out there and awesome in the world?
The weird girl thing to me is really our collective humanness of humaning. You know, and I like to make nouns out of everything. So everything has an ing, the weird and the weirding, you know, and as a woman, I think it's our collective sisterhood of womaning. That's what I like to call it too. But the weird girl adventures is literally for everybody. And it's an invitation to cultivate our quirk, allow our weird, and know that we are not isolated. You know, it's really to provide that sense that we are just part of this thing called humaning, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It comes back to what you said at the beginning, in that we're all having that. Would you say we're all the same dog with different paws? Like we've all got similar conversations going on in our head, and we need to be okay with letting people see that side of us. And if not for ourselves, for the fact that helps other people be okay with that side of them.
Yes. And weird doesn't know it's weird until it's judged. Like I thought the things that I think, you know, I thought everybody took Ken's leg off to see if Barbie.
Right.
Everybody took a pin and gave Barbie acne to see, you know, what it would look like. You know, I still think a lot of the things that I do, everybody else does, until somebody says, "Oh, you are so unique," or "You're so different," or whatever. And so there's a uniqueness, but there's some other version out there of people doing the exact same thing. But when you're weird, you don't know you're weird until some egregious judgment in a negative way tells you that you are. And that is when you stop allowing your weird.
Well, yeah. And it's sad when you stop allowing your weird. And I think when you can come back and tap back into it, that's where you get that sense of freedom and, you know, fulfillment, because you're actually like, oh, it's okay. And one thing that I remind people all the time, that other people's words and judgment, it only has the power we give it, right? And so I can throw something at you and you can choose whether or not how to react to it. But if you sit there and accept the power, it's like, I think about it like if you're pouring lighter fluid on a fire. People could be pouring lighter fluid all the time, but it's not going to go up in flames until I give it the spark. And if someone gives me that, they say a negative word or put me down or don't like me, well, me giving power to it is when I'm giving it that spark, and that's what gives it the fire and makes it worse. And that's what actually starts to harm me versus just letting it kind of run off and evaporate.
I love that. I also think that noticing the spark, that initial spark, is super important because, you know, we don't get rid of all of our narratives. So noticing that little tiny spark, maybe it's not quite an ember yet.
Right.
Maybe it's a spark. And noticing that spark, we have the opportunity for choice to fan the flame so that it becomes a fire, to notice our difficult emotions around it and be like, yeah, not my choice. I'm going to go eat cheese, even though I'm lactose intolerant. I don't know why I said cheese, but you know, it's noticing, because it's very human to let something bother us in that little spark, and then being able to make choice.
Yeah, and that's true. It is very human, and so we also have to not be so hard on ourselves when we have those feelings. It's like, and what advice would you give to someone as to how to be aware of that spark?
So I really prefer not to use the words we must, we should, we have to,
Mm.
we need to. I don't like words like be. Um, Sometimes I think the only value I have to anybody is to remind people to moisturize their neck. But honestly, um, honestly, I didn't know how to bear witness to my own thoughts and
Mm.
how I made meaning until I started practicing mindfulness. And so, if there's anything that I would invite people to, it's to a practice of mindfulness. And by the way, I am not woo woo. I don't like yoga. Um, I don't, but it can also be incredibly accessible and approachable when we can be aware of how we make meaning. We get to have choice.
Hmm.
My invitation to people is to explore in whatever way you can how to practice bearing witness to your own thinking.
Hmm. I love that. And I it's funny to me that you say you don't like yoga, and that is one of the first things that people think of when they think about mindfulness, right? It's like, oh, well, this is the whole package, but we get too caught up sometimes in, well, if I pick this, it comes with all of that, and it doesn't have to. And I have to tell for the listeners out there, you have to go follow Shelley on her pages. When we first connected, it was I was seeing your art, your quick kitchen collages, and the different things that you're doing, and I didn't know why, but I'm like, I like this girl. I can't I can't define it. I can't explain it. It's just fun, and it's seeing the world from a different perspective, and it's making me think and look around going, what is out there that I'm not noticing? Because Shelley is seeing this different perspective, and it's very positive. And so you will enjoy following Shelley and getting insight from her. And so looking forward to your book that is coming out on Mother's Day.
The glue is drying. Weird girl adventures from A to Z.
That is beautiful. And are you open to explaining what the glue is drying means, or do you want to wait for the book to come out?
No, it's totally okay. So it's really funny because I am a collage artist and I use the glue is drying as the name of my collage art, and my Instagram for my art is the glue is drying. But the glue is drying actually comes from a very dark poem that I wrote many years ago. It's shattered pieces, broken glass, kicked in heart, fell on ass, pieces of myself I once knew, cracked and broken, held by glue. There's more stanzas, but the end is done dying, the glue is drying. And so what it really means is that pieces of ourselves fall off of us. We give pieces of ourselves away. And it's this kind of notion of being disintegrated. And we keep on trying to pick these pieces back up. But when we come into this sort of self-actualization, which becomes actually self-transcendence, I'll share that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
This self-actualization, things begin to stick. The parts of ourselves, those pieces that are shattered and broken, we can stick them back on and they stay. And then the transcending this is when we use that why and it becomes our must, and we have to use it in a way that is of service to inviting others to their own transformation.
Wow, that is beautiful. And that I wanted you to share that because when I first started following you and I saw the glue is drying and I'm seeing collages, I'm thinking very surface level. And when you explained that, I was like, that is just deep. And I cannot wait to read the book because I know it's going to be fun and heartwarming and everything. So we're just down to a little bit here, but what's one quote or advice you'd leave with people on what they could do to own their awkward?
I think that what I'd like to say is life is a roller coaster to a freight train down a rabbit hole. And it's always going to be that way. But the ride can be shorter when we learn to get off, but it's
Mm,
always going to come back and we can get back on. But the ride doesn't have to last as long.
I love that. It gives us some control. Well, Shelley, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. I am so grateful for you to take this time today and share with our listeners and being willing to open up about what your awkward is.
Such a privilege, Andy, and I feel exactly the same about this time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So everybody be sure to follow Shelley on all of her social media. All of the links will be below in the description. And as always, don't forget to own your awkward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.